My brother sold our father's watch for $40, then found out it was the only thing left in the will. I didn't even want to be at the lawyer's office. That kind of place smells like regret and old cigars, mahogany walls, dusty blinds, a receptionist who can't look you in the eye. But there I was, slouched in a cracked leather chair, still in the same jeans I wore to Dad's funeral 2 days before. Across from me sat my younger brother, Mason, aviators on his head, leather jacket, tapping a metal pin against the armrest like he had somewhere better to be. "Can we speed this up?" he muttered, just loud enough for the lawyer to hear. "I've got a meeting downtown." He didn't. He never does. That's just how Mason is. Always posturing, always impatient, always betting on a future that never quite arrives. The lawyer, a wiry guy with trembling hands and a last name that sounded like it belonged on a Civil War battlefield, ignored him. He cleared his throat and opened a slim manila folder. "Your father," he said, "left a very specific will." I didn't expect anything. I hadn't spoken to Dad in months. Not since the fight about the house. He wanted to sell it. I wanted to fix it. He said I was sentimental, that I saw ghosts in the walls. I said he was running. He hung up on me, and we never spoke again. But Mason? Mason figured Dad owed him something. For the years he spent chasing after his approval. For the times he bailed him out, financially and otherwise. For being the fun son, the one who brought women and whiskey to Thanksgiving. The lawyer reached into the folder and pulled out a single item, a photo of a pocket watch. Brass casing, cracked glass, the kind of thing you'd find in a pawn shop or an attic. It looked just like the one that used to sit on Dad's bedside table. I remembered seeing it when I was 10, back when we were still a family. This, the lawyer said, sliding the photo across the desk, was the only item specified in the will. The estate has been liquidated. Debts were settled. No property, no funds. Only the watch remains. Mason scoffed. "Seriously? That thing?" He laughed, shaking his head. "I pawned it for $40 a month ago." The lawyer blinked slowly. "I'm sorry, what?" "I found it in a box of junk when we were cleaning out the house. Didn't think it mattered. Thought it was just old junk." My stomach dropped. The lawyer closed the folder. "Then I suppose you've made a very costly mistake, Mr. Walker." "What are you talking about?" Mason said. "It's a damn watch." "No," the lawyer said, eyes narrowing. "It was your inheritance." For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the wall clock. Mason sat back, suddenly pale. "Wait, you're not serious." The lawyer nodded. Inside that watch was a key. Specifically, the key to a safety deposit box. A private one. Your father made it very clear the contents of that box were to be passed on only through the watch. "And what's in the box?" I asked. He looked at me, then at Mason. "I have no idea. I was not given access. Your father was particular." Mason stood up. "So what now?" "It's gone." "What am I supposed to do? Go back and beg the pawn shop?" "Not quite," the lawyer said, and that's when he handed me the second envelope. My name on the front. In Dad's handwriting. I didn't move. Mason looked at me like I'd won something. "Of course he left you something," he said. "The golden boy." But I wasn't smiling. Because I knew my father, and if this letter was from him, it wasn't going to be some heartfelt apology. It was going to hurt. I opened the envelope. Inside was a note, and one sentence stood out like a knife to the ribs. "Ethan, if you're reading this, your brother just made the same mistake I did." I didn't understand it then, but I would. And when I did, it changed everything. I read the letter 3 times before the words even sank in. My father's handwriting was neat, exact, the same style he used for birthday cards and scrawled grocery lists taped to the fridge. Only this time, the message wasn't asking for milk and eggs. It was something else entirely. "Ethan, if you're reading this, your brother just made the same mistake I did." What mistake? What was he talking about? I looked up at Mason, who was pacing the office now, his boots clacking against the hardwood like he owned the place. "Do you even remember where you sold it?" I asked, my voice tighter than I expected. "What? The watch?" "No clue. Could be anywhere. I went through half the shops on 5th Street that week trying to scrape together rent." The lawyer was still seated, but he looked 10 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. "If the watch is lost," he said carefully, "the contents of the deposit box may be unreachable. Without that key." "I get it," Mason snapped. I screwed up. But why would Dad hide something that important in a goddamn antique? I didn't answer. My fingers were still curled around the letter. It wasn't just that one line. There was more. It was short. No flowery goodbye. No words of affection. Just blunt sentences from a man who never wasted time with sentiment. There are things I never told either of you. Regrets. Decisions I made that tore this family apart. If Mason sold the watch, then he's still chasing quick fixes. And if you're reading this, Ethan, then you're the one who has to make it right. Go home. Start in the cellar. I never had the courage to face what I buried. That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just instructions, like he was giving me one last job to do. One more responsibility dumped in my lap. Just like every time Mason vanished, and I was the one left picking up the pieces. I folded the letter slowly and slipped it into my coat pocket. Mason watched me. What did it say? Nothing, I said, standing. Just Dad being cryptic. He narrowed his eyes. You sure about that? No, I said honestly. But I'm going back to the house. He scoffed. That place. We already cleared it out. Yeah, I said, grabbing my keys. That's what I'm worried about. I didn't wait for him to follow. The house was cold when I got there. The utilities had been shut off, the air stale with dust and abandonment. It was strange walking through it alone, each creaking step echoing like the house was remembering me or warning me. I hadn't been down to the cellar in years. Dad always kept it locked, said it was just junk, old tools, paint cans, maybe some forgotten boxes from before Mom left. But I remembered something. When I was 13, I tried to sneak down there with a flashlight. I barely got 2 steps in before Dad grabbed me by the collar and yanked me back up like I'd touched a live wire. He didn't yell, but his face said everything. Like he was terrified. Not angry, afraid. Now, standing at the top of those same wooden steps, I reached for the light switch. Nothing. Of course. I pulled out my phone and flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows down the stairs. I hesitated. Then I went down. The air was thick, the kind that clings to your throat. My boots hit concrete, and the first thing I saw was the workbench. Rusted tools still hanging, untouched. A saw, a hammer, an old red vise. And then, behind an oil drum, something I hadn't noticed before, a wooden trunk. Not just a box. A trunk. Heavy. Metal hinges. A lock snapped open and dangling. My heart kicked. I knelt down and lifted the lid. Inside, buried under a worn tarp, was a shoebox. Inside the shoebox, a stack of envelopes, bound with twine, each one marked with a year. My birth year. Then Mason's. 2001. Then Mom's name. And at the bottom, one more item, a receipt. From a bank. A safety deposit box. Number. Location. Date. 2 weeks before Dad died. I sat there, surrounded by dust and silence, realizing something bigger than us had been hidden down here for decades. And suddenly, one thing was crystal clear. My father hadn't just left us a puzzle. He left a confession. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the cellar floor, the box of letters beside me, the air thick with whatever ghosts my father had tried to smother down here. The kind of silence you don't find in the real world, only in places that haven't been touched in years. I opened the envelope marked 1999. The year I turned 12, the year Mom left for good. The letter was short. 5 sentences. Barely that. I know what I did. I told myself it was for the best. But watching Ethan that night, I realized the damage was done. He saw it, the fight, the blood. And I saw it in his face. He stopped being a child right then. My hands shook. I remember that night. I thought I'd forgotten it, or at least buried it deep enough that it stopped knocking. But there it was, sharp, fresh, like I was standing at the top of the stairs again, hearing the crash of a wine bottle, the scream, the door slam. Dad never explained. He just said Mom left because she couldn't handle domestic life. And I believed him. What else was I supposed to do? I shoved the letter back in the box and grabbed the one marked 2001. Mason's birth year. It wasn't really a letter. More like a list. 1. Mason isn't mine. 2. Don't tell him. 3. If he finds out, he'll never forgive either of us. 4. I forgave her. Eventually. But I never stopped wondering. 5. I raised him anyway. Because someone had to. I stopped breathing. It was like the floor opened under me, and everything I thought I knew started free-falling. I'd spent my whole life thinking Dad favored Mason. Spoiled him, excused him, covered his disasters without blinking. I thought it was just favoritism. The kind that corrodes quietly and makes you feel small every time someone laughs at a joke you told 5 minutes ago, only louder, because Mason said it this time. But now I understood. It wasn't favoritism. It was guilt. I sat back against the wall, clutching the box like it could anchor me. My father wasn't a sentimental man. He didn't do keepsakes. So whatever he put in that safety deposit box, it wasn't trinkets. It was penance. And maybe a key to something I wasn't ready to see yet. By morning, I was at the bank. The woman behind the desk had a name tag that said Marcy and a smile that looked stapled to her face. "I'm sorry, sir," she said for the third time. "But without the key, I can't access the deposit box. Not even with a death certificate. I have the box number. I have power of attorney on record. I have the receipt." "I understand," she said, though she didn't. "But our policy is absolute." I stared at her. "It's my father's box. He left me a letter. He hid the key in a watch, but my brother pawned it. You're telling me one piece of brass keeps me from knowing what my father wanted me to find?" She softened a little. "I'm saying, maybe you should find the watch." I walked out with nothing but the same questions I dragged in. Mason was in the parking lot when I got home, leaning against his car, arms crossed, sunglasses on, like we were in a cheap detective movie. "You went to the bank," he said, straightening. "Yeah," I said. "I did. Any luck?" "Nope." He looked away, jaw tightening. "Look, I've been thinking. Maybe we can track the watch. You know, call the shops, figure out where I dropped it." "You don't even remember the store." "I'll figure it out." Why the sudden change? He didn't answer, so I stepped closer. "You found something," I said. He looked at me, annoyed. "No, You're not a fixer, Mason. You don't do legwork unless there's a payoff." "What is it?" His mouth twitched. Then he pulled something from his jacket, a folded paper. Crumpled, oil-smudged. A pawn shop receipt. I snatched it. "Mel's Gold and Loan." I read. 3 weeks ago. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I was going to tell you. I just didn't know what it meant until yesterday." "Until what?" "Until I went there this morning. To buy it back." I froze. "And?" He looked at me. "It's gone. Gone. Sold. A guy bought it last week. Cash. No name. No record." I wanted to scream. But then Mason said, "They have security footage." And just like that, the game changed. Mel's Gold and Loan was tucked between a liquor store and a boarded-up video rental. The kind of place where neon signs flicker like dying stars, and every customer walks in either desperate or dangerous. I stepped in, and the bell over the door gave a sad little ding. The guy behind the counter looked like he'd been carved out of cigarette ash and bad decisions. Wiry frame, yellow-stained beard, one eye a little lazier than the other. He nodded once when he saw me. "You must be the brother," he said, voice like gravel soaked in coffee. "The quiet one." "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. "I need to see your security footage." He leaned back, arms folded. "I'm not in the habit of playing Netflix for strangers." "Mason said you'd help." His lip twitched. He also tried to flirt with my niece while asking about a stolen Rolex. That sounded like Mason. I reached into my pocket, pulled out 2 20s. Set them down on the counter. He stared at them like they offended him. "That's gas station bribery," he said. "Try again." I added another 40. His fingers twitched. "Fine," he grunted. Backroom. The footage was grainy, black and white, timestamp blinking in the corner. The guy fast-forwarded until he found it. "There," he said, jabbing a greasy finger at the screen. "That's when it happened." The date read last Thursday. The man in the video wasn't what I expected. Late 50s, heavy set, but dressed well. Sports coat, buttoned shirt. He walked in with purpose, like someone who knew exactly what he came for. He talked to the clerk, pointed at something in the display case, handed over cash, and walked out. It was too fast. Too neat. "Can you zoom in?" I asked. The guy scoffed. "This ain't the Pentagon. You want a facial scan? Go talk to the FBI." Still, I squinted at the man's face. There was something about him. Not familiar, but off. Like he didn't belong here. Like he'd been waiting for that watch. "Can I get a copy?" I asked. He snorted. "You bringing me a USB drive, or should I burn it into your soul with a stare?" I grabbed my phone and recorded the screen. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Outside, Mason was leaning against the hood of his car, chewing sunflower seeds like he was at a ball game. "Well?" he asked when he saw my face. "I got footage. And a man bought it. Looked older. Well-dressed. Didn't seem like your typical pawn shopper." Mason frowned. "Think Dad knew him?" "Or he knew Dad," I said, and was waiting for the watch to show up. Mason stood straight, finally catching the gravity. You think this guy knew what was inside? I don't think it was random, I said. This wasn't some collector. He knew exactly what he was doing. Mason blew out a breath, nervous energy rising. So what now? We just chase ghosts? No, I said. We dig. That night, I went back to the trunk. I needed more. Answers. Clues. Something that made sense of the box, the letters, the man in the footage. I flipped through the envelopes again. Most were dated. Until I found one that wasn't. No year. No name. Just one word written in all caps. Ruth. I didn't recognize it at first. Not until I opened it and saw the first line. I told her she was my biggest mistake, and I think that's when she decided to destroy everything. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Ruth wasn't a place. Ruth was a person. My mother. The letter was different. Longer. Unhinged in places. Full of contradictions. Dad wrote like a man unraveling. Blaming her. Blaming himself. Circling some truth he couldn't bear to say outright. He mentioned money. A betrayal. Something about blackmail. But the part that hit hardest? I buried the truth with the watch. If anyone finds it, they'll know what she did. What we both did. I sat back, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about revenge. Not mine. His. My father had set this whole thing up like a trap, and now someone else had pulled the trigger. The next morning, I drove to the only person still alive who might know anything about what my father meant by what we both did. Aunt June. She was my mother's older sister. Lived alone in a bungalow with crocheted blankets draped over every surface and a cat that looked like it had been embalmed 3 years ago. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since Mom's funeral. She opened the door and blinked at me like I'd risen from the grave. Ethan, can I come in? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. The living room smelled like cinnamon and mothballs. I stayed standing. I need to ask you about something, I said, pulling out the letter. When she saw the name Ruth written in my father's handwriting, she paled. I thought all that was done, she whispered. What was? I pressed. What happened between them? What did my mother do that made him write this? She sank into her armchair like the question had knocked the wind out of her. You need to understand something, she said slowly. Your mother, she wasn't always who you think she was. Try me. June rubbed her temples, like the memories were a migraine she'd been dodging for decades. She married your father for safety, not love. He was already on the upswing. Business, property, respect. Your mom, she came from nothing. Our dad was a drunk. Our mom was gone before we were out of school. Ruth figured if she could marry someone stable, she'd finally be safe. So she used him, I said. No, June corrected gently. She needed him. And he needed her too. Someone beautiful. Someone who made him look softer around the edges. They were a deal, not a love story. That was the beginning. I let that sink in. She continued. But somewhere along the way, your dad started pulling back. There was someone else, a woman named Lydia. Your mom found out. She never confronted him directly. She just started plotting. Plotting what? She opened secret accounts. Started moving money in small amounts. Took out life insurance policies in both their names, separate ones. She was preparing for something. And the watch? I asked. I don't know what's in that watch, she said. But I remember your dad buying it for himself the year after Mason was born. He said it was for when the house starts burning. Chills ran down my spine. I stood. Thank you, Aunt June. She caught my sleeve as I turned. Ethan, whatever your father left behind, be careful. That man didn't die with peace in his heart. He died trying to settle the score. Back home, I found Mason sitting on my porch steps, eyes bloodshot, holding a six-pack like it was a peace offering. I can't stop thinking about the footage, he said. That guy, he was waiting for it. He knew. I sat beside him. I talked to Aunt June. He didn't look at me. And Dad and Mom were a business transaction. She found out he cheated. She started preparing for war. He let out a long breath. You think the guy from the pawn shop was part of that? I think, I said slowly, that whatever's in that safety deposit box doesn't just expose what they did to each other. It could bury someone else, too. Mason looked at me now. You think it's blackmail? I think it's worse. I pulled out my phone and replayed the footage from the pawn shop. I paused it on the man's face. There was something in his eyes. Not panic, not urgency. Purpose. Like he'd been waiting years for the moment that watch resurfaced. That night, I dug through Dad's old desk drawers, hoping something would connect. And tucked in the back of one folder, an old receipt. A donation. To Glenridge Recovery Center. Dated 2003. A handwritten note next to it. Cover the second stay. She'll need it. I froze. 2003 was the year Mom disappeared for 6 months and told us she was helping June recover from surgery. She wasn't in California. She was in rehab, and Dad had paid for it, silently, without a word. Not to her. Not to us. I flipped the receipt over. On the back was a name. Dr. Harry Voss. That name rang like a bell deep in my gut. I pulled up the footage again, stared at the man's face. And then it hit me, the high school science fair. 10th grade. Dad shaking hands with a man in a blazer and wire-rimmed glasses, introducing him as an old friend from med school. Harry Voss. Same face. Same crooked smile. The man who bought the watch. He wasn't just an old friend. He was the man holding my family's last secret. Mason stared at the name on my phone screen like it had just whispered a threat. Voss, he said. As in Dr. Voss? The guy from Dad's med school days? I nodded. Yeah. I thought it was some vague memory until I saw the photo again. Same face. Same glasses. And the guy at Mel's? That's him. No question. Mason let out a low whistle. You think he's the one Dad was hiding everything from? I think he might be the one Dad was trying to expose. We were sitting on the floor of Dad's old study, the trunk of letters between us, the house dark except for the desk lamp's yellow glow. I grabbed one of the final envelopes. No date, no name, just a shaky scrawl on the front. If he gets it, it's over. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet. Not a letter, a medical form. Patient, Ruth Walker. Doctor, H. Voss, M.D. Diagnosis, acute benzodiazepine withdrawal, suspected misuse over extended period. Treatment recommended, inpatient care. Dual diagnosis protocol. It was dated 2003. My chest tightened. She was addicted, I said out loud, though the words barely made a sound. Mason's face darkened. Wait, you don't think? Dad wasn't the one who needed hiding, I said, voice trembling. He was covering for her. All those stories about June's surgery? Lies. She was in rehab, and Voss was the doctor overseeing it. Mason looked at the paper. But why would Dad keep this? Because someone threatened to use it against her. Or against him. Maybe both. Then Mason did something he rarely did. He got quiet. Thoughtful. Almost scared. You don't think Voss and Mom were, he trailed off. I don't know. But the timeline fits. She vanished, came back hollowed out. Then Dad bought the watch. Then everything fell apart. I leaned back, my pulse pounding. Voss wanted that watch. Bad enough to walk into a pawn shop in broad daylight. That's not desperation. That's a man cleaning up a loose end. The next morning, I drove to Glenridge Recovery. The building sat like a castle of quiet regret on the edge of town, surrounded by trees that whispered when the wind passed through. Inside, the receptionist was polite but firm. No, we can't release patient information, even for deceased individuals. I expected that. So I lied. I said I was working on a family medical history project, that we were screening for inherited conditions, that we had no interest in gossip, just records. She still refused. Until I pulled out my father's letter, the one addressed to Ethan, the one with the line, "Your brother made the same mistake I did." I didn't show her the whole thing, just enough to suggest legal permission, family trauma, and that I was tired of dead ends. Something in her shifted. She typed a few things. Looked up. Dr. Voss retired 6 years ago. He lives in Belmont Ridge now. He left us a forwarding address. By nightfall, I was parked outside a pale yellow house on a sloped hill in Belmont Ridge. No lights on. A for sale sign stuck in the front yard like a warning. I knocked anyway. Nothing. I was halfway back to my car when the door opened behind me. "Can I help you?" His voice hadn't changed. Calm. Controlled. Like he'd spent a lifetime talking people down from ledges. I turned. Dr. Harry Voss stood in the doorway in a sweater vest and slacks, holding a glass of red wine like it was part of his hand. "I'm Ethan Walker," I said. "My father was Daniel Walker." His eyes didn't flicker. "I see. I believe you recently purchased a watch at a pawn shop." He sipped his wine. "You're mistaken. I have you on video." That got him. Just a blink. A flicker of hesitation. I stepped forward. "I think you know what was inside that watch. And I think you were trying to keep it from me." He sighed. "Why would I do that?" "Because whatever you and my mother were hiding, my father found out. and he wanted the truth to come out. Dr. Voss looked past me, toward the empty street. Then he said something that stopped my breath cold. Your father made a mistake trying to fix people who didn't want to be saved. He stepped back and closed the door. Didn't slam it. Didn't threaten. Just shut me out. But that was all the confirmation I needed. The man who bought the watch didn't just want it for what was inside. He wanted to erase what my father left behind. And now I was the last one who knew the trail even existed. The next morning, I called Mason and told him to meet me at the old house. He showed up 20 minutes late, smelling like gas station coffee and guilt. I couldn't sleep, he mumbled. Kept thinking about what that guy said. Voss. That line, about Dad trying to fix people who didn't want to be saved. I nodded. Yeah, me too. We sat on the back steps, the cold wood pressing through our jeans, silence stretching between us like it always had when we were kids, after the shouting, before the pretending. You know what's weird? Mason said finally. I thought if we ever found out what Dad was hiding, it'd be about him. A second family. A secret kid. Something he did. I let that hang for a second, then said, turns out the biggest secret was what he didn't do. Mason looked at me, confused. He didn't expose her. I explained. Didn't humiliate her. Didn't use the file Voss gave him to win. He just held on to it. Buried it. Like he wanted us to find it, not the world. But why? I took a long breath. Because he still loved her. Even after everything. Mason shook his head. Man, that's heavy. Yeah, I said. It is. Then I showed him the last letter. It was tucked behind the false bottom of the trunk, folded into a small square. On the outside, in fading ink, was one word. For Ethan. When Mason's ready. I unfolded it carefully. Son, if you're reading this, it means the watch is gone and the box is out of reach. That's not an accident. I knew Voss would find it first. He's always had a sixth sense for leverage. But this isn't about revenge. Not anymore. It's about truth. And the truth is, your mother was sick. And I didn't see it. Or I refused to. I thought she was just angry, bitter, petty. I didn't know about the pills. I didn't know about the affair, not at first. Voss wasn't just her doctor. He was her escape hatch. And when he realized she'd told me everything, he panicked. Tried to cut ties. Tried to disappear. But not before giving me the files. Maybe to buy silence. Maybe out of guilt. I don't know. I kept the watch as insurance. Not to use. Just to have. To remind me that secrets don't disappear. They just wait. And now you found them. What you do next is up to you. But if Mason is with you, then I trust you made the right call. He deserves to know the truth. Even if it hurts. Tell him I forgave her. And I forgave him, too. All I ask is that you don't turn this into a war. Our family's been at war long enough. Love, Dad. I finished reading and handed Mason the letter. He took it with both hands like it might fall apart in his grip. He didn't speak for a long time. Just stared at the words, his eyes flicking left to right, jaw tight. Then, finally, he forgave me. For what? You sold the watch, I said gently. He shook his head. He means more than that. I know. We sat in the silence. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't hate it. Didn't need to fill it. Because we were both finally seeing the same picture. Mason rubbed his face. So what now? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the last clue I had. The safety deposit box receipt. The number. The location. All still valid. If the watch is gone, we find the box another way, I said. Mason raised an eyebrow. You know how impossible that sounds, right? Yeah, I said. But Dad left us the map. We just have to figure out where he hid the key. Mason let out a low laugh. You think it's still somewhere in the house? I think it was never in the watch. He froze. I nodded slowly. I think the key was always somewhere else. And the watch? That was a decoy. A distraction. Mason stood up, pacing now. So you're telling me the last 3 weeks of panic were all for nothing? No, I said, standing with him. They were for something bigger. He looked around the house like it was suddenly alive. Then he turned back to me. All right, he said. Let's find the real key. And just like that, for the first time in years, we were in it together. We started in the attic. Not because it made sense, but because every memory of Dad always seemed to float upward, like dust on old beams and unfinished promises. Mason hauled the ladder down, and we both stood there, staring at the square cut into the ceiling like it might swallow us whole. You ever been up there? He asked. Not since high school, I said. Dad used to keep it locked. Said it was just insulation and regrets. Mason grunted. Sounds about right. We climbed. The air was thick, dry, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. There were boxes, so many damn boxes, labeled with years, holidays, scribbled notes like Christmas Lights 2007 and Ethan's college stuff. And then, in the far corner, something different. A wooden toolbox. Clean. Untouched by dust. We both stopped. Mason raised an eyebrow. Think he wanted us to find this? Let's find out. I opened it. Inside, a false bottom. Underneath it, a velvet pouch. I reached in, heart hammering. It was too light to be a key. I opened the pouch. A ring. Simple. Gold. No stone. Worn smooth. Mason leaned in. That Mom's. I nodded slowly. She stopped wearing it after rehab. Said it didn't fit anymore. I turned it over in my fingers, and then I saw it. Etched on the inside, nearly invisible, a tiny set of numbers. B. 2187. The box number. The ring wasn't the key. It was the key. 2 hours later, we were back at the bank. I handed the ring to the woman behind the counter, careful to point out the engraving. I held my breath as she scanned the records. She looked up. This matches the file. Then she looked at me differently, like she knew we weren't here for a simple retrieval, like she'd seen families crack open like eggs in these very halls. Give me a moment, she said. 5 minutes later, she returned with a sealed box the size of a shoebox. Matte black. No markings. No labels. She placed it on the table in a private room and left us alone. Mason and I just stared at it. You sure about this? He asked. No, I said. But we came this far. I opened it. Inside, stacked neatly, were 3 items. A thick envelope marked confession in all caps, with our father's handwriting. A mini cassette tape recorder, the kind Dad used to carry when he dictated notes. A photo. Just one. It was of Mom, in a hospital gown, standing next to Dr. Voss. They were smiling. But it wasn't a rehab photo. It was clinical. Cold. I flipped it over. On the back, 2002. Trial 4 complete. Awaiting transfer approval. Mason looked over my shoulder. What the hell does that mean? I didn't answer. I was already opening the envelope. The confession was typewritten. 3 pages. I started reading out loud. To Ethan and Mason. If you're holding this, it means I lost the gamble. That Voss got to the watch before you got to the truth. But maybe not the whole truth. Maybe this box is my second chance. Here's the truth. Your mother didn't relapse by accident. She didn't go to rehab for addiction. She was part of something bigger, an experimental program Voss was running. He told her it was for anxiety, trauma, stress management. She signed a waiver. Never read the fine print. He put her on an unapproved cocktail, a chemical trial never cleared by ethics boards. She deteriorated fast. Memory loss, rage, withdrawal symptoms so severe she couldn't tell day from night. When she tried to back out, he threatened her. Said she'd be declared unstable, lose custody. She believed him. So did I at first. Until I found the original forms, the ones Voss never thought she kept. That photo? That's not rehab. That was the research wing at Darrow Medical. She was a guinea pig. I tried to report him, but no one would listen. Voss had too much power, too many friends. He made the files disappear. Threatened me. Said if I pushed, he'd bury her. Said he had evidence that she was abusive, unfit. Lies, all of it. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed quiet. I took the documents, hid them, and waited. I bought the watch. Planted the first clue. I built the trap. For you too, and for him. I'm sorry I didn't protect her. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. But maybe now, you'll know the truth. And maybe you'll do what I couldn't. End it. Dad. When I finished, Mason sat down hard in the nearest chair. Jesus Christ, he whispered. He wasn't hiding from us. He was saving us. I looked at the tape recorder. My fingers hovered over the play button. I think it's time we hear his voice. And I pressed play.